The room was packed, the atmosphere permeated by the muffled sound of loud music and fake laughter. Never I liked these company parties. But tonight would be different. Something inside me was burning with unease that I couldn't ignore the last-minute invitation, the distant look on her face as she left the house. The evasive answers of the previous weeks, everything pointed to something I refused to admit. But there I was crossing the room, my gaze searching among the shadows, illuminated by colored lights. And it was then, when I saw her, she was with her back to me, laughing and gesturing with a glass of wine in her hand beside her. A man. His laugh that had previously comforted me now sounded cruel and sharp. He approached her and whispered something in her ear. I saw the light touch on her arm, a casual gesture, but too intimate to ignore. I felt my stomach turn. I didn't know if I wanted to face them there in the middle of everyone, or just leave and act as if it had never happened. I took a step back, trying to catch my breath. It was at that moment that the stage changed. The lights dimmed, and everyone turned to the screen in the center of the room. A presentation would begin from the company, it was announced, as a tribute to the team's achievements. Throughout the year, I couldn't concentrate on the words of the master of ceremonies. My attention remained fixed on that corner of the room until the first image appeared. It was a video. At first it looked like a promotional clip, Smile's moments of teamwork. But then something changed. Her face appeared laughing, but in a context that was not that of the company. They were shaky images, and of an amateur of an intimate dinner. My heart accelerated, and the room fell into a deathly silence. It was her, but not me. The man at her side, the same one I had just seen. Now he held her hand under the table. His smile of complicity. Like a knife turning slowly in my chest, the video continued exposing moments of a relationship that I never knew existed. The wine that served her. The touch of the fingers on your cheek. The stolen kiss at the end of a night. A murmur began to grow between the companions, a whirlwind of voices that I could not contain. The only thing more deafening than that buzz was the sound of my own heart beating in my ears. I looked at her now, static in a corner of the room with a pale face and wide-open eyes as if looking for a way out. She saw me, and in that moment her desperation became visible. She dropped the glass, breaking the silence around her. He tried to grab her, but she pushed him away. She didn't know what to do. Stay, and face the shame, run away, and let it haunt me forever. I can explain, she tried to say with a trembling voice, but unable to break the flood of stares in her direction. Can you explain what? My own voice surprised me, hoarse, full of something between pain and anger. She didn't answer. She stayed there, and standing, trying to put together words that would never come out. The only thing she could do was keep that look pleading that only increased my humiliation across the room. Her lover stood still now, a statue of shame and fear. Her name, hitherto unknown to me, floated in the whispers of the people around me. The revelation of who she was only added fuel to the growing fire inside me. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a conspiracy. Something that involved our social circle, our trust, our history. The video ended with an image of the two of them laughing together, holding hands in a place I never knew she had visited. Silence once again took over the room, but now it was heavy, full of judgment, and I stood there in the middle of it all, feeling the weight of hundreds of glances that alternated between pity and derision. I knew that this night wouldn't end there. I knew that every moment of this humiliation would spread like wildfire in a dry field, burning away everything I believed to be true. But what I didn't know, what no one knew yet, was how far that betrayal really went. How many layers were still hidden, and more importantly, what would the clock in the hallway do from there? It seemed to have stopped, but it was necessary to make a decision there with all eyes on us. I asked myself, what would be the first piece to fall in this game of dominoes that they had created? Welcome to the channel where the truth about betrayal is exposed in exciting stories. Here, we do not support, tolerate, or romanticize cheating. In no way are the stories fictional, but they show how infidelity destroys lives, relationships, and hearts. Get ready, because now you are going to hear a shocking story full of emotion and twists. Good story. The clock read 7 p.m. when Daniel entered the house, carrying in his hands 2 bags full of ingredients for dinner. The smell of rain still hung in the air. Mixed with the fragrance of the polished wood of the furniture, he felt an immediate comfort when he crossed the door and heard the familiar sound of water running in the kitchen sink. There was Elena with her back turned, drying a plate with precise and methodical movements. It was a common scene, but one that he always enjoyed. Elena. She had something that attracted the gaze without effort, a delicate beauty, but marked by strong features. Her dark hair fell loose to her shoulders, and the way she frowned when she was concentrated revealed a meticulous woman, attentive to detail. Her appearance, however, was just the surface. Elena was a woman of sharp intelligence, something that had captivated Daniel from the moment he met her, years ago, at a business event to which she was invited for him. Life with Elena was stable and secure. Their marriage was like a solid ground on which he could stand without fear of the ground giving way. Or at least that is what he thought with a smile. Daniel placed the bags on the counter and said, "I brought some things for the risotto. Do you want to open the wine while I start?" Elena turned around with a slight curve in her lips, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Daniel noticed, but decided not to comment in the last few months. The moments of disconnection between the two seemed to be increasing, nothing alarming. Just small cracks that he attributed to daily fatigue. She took a glass, poured the wine, and handed it to him before disappearing upstairs, saying that she needed to solve something on her cell phone. Daniel stayed in the kitchen cutting onions and preparing the ingredients. While his thoughts wandered, he remembered with nostalgia the time when dinners were more lively, full of laughter, and long conversations about any subject lately. The meals were silent, and Elena's answers were brief, as if she were always somewhere else. Despite this, he preferred to believe that they were phases. After all, every relationship went through moments of monotony while the risotto began to bubble in the pan. Daniela A.O. to set the table, always she liked the details. The carefully folded napkins, the lit candles. The small gestures that made Elena smile. She believed that these gestures, although simple, they were like glue for the pieces that were beginning to separate. When Elena lowered the table, it was set, but the mobile was still in her hands. I said, "I would be quick, but you already know Patricia." She commented with a weak laugh. "Don't stop talking. It's good to know that she still has news." She tried to sound relaxed, but the discomfort was palpable. Who was occupying Elena's time, really? She pushed that thought aside. Paranoia never helped. Elena looked at Daniel as he served the risotto. The silence between the two seemed to resonate more than the sound of the cutlery against the plates. She knew that he noticed the changes. The look of Daniel, before full of confidence and admiration, was now marked by a hint of uncertainty. It bothered her, but she didn't know how to solve it. Elena liked the life they built together, the big house with windows that let in generously, the light, the mutual friends, the travel plans that never seemed to take off. But there was something inside her that no longer found space in that stability. A malaise that she didn't know how to explain. Not even to herself when he asked her about her day. She gave generic answers, talked about meetings at work, a new idea for a project she was leading. Daniel listened, but she felt that she was waiting for something. Maybe a confession, maybe a truth. That she herself still didn't have the courage to face after dinner. While Daniel washed the dishes, Elena went to the office, sat down in front of the computer, and opened a folder with old photographs. They were so happy in all of them. Weddings, birthdays, vacations. Everything seemed perfect. But in her mind there was always something out of place, as if an element was missing. She couldn't name a notification on her cell phone made her jump. She looked at the device as if it were a bomb about to explode. She sighed as she read the message and quickly deleted it as she had done for the past few weeks. Daniel walked into the office after a while, bringing 2 cups of tea. He placed one on the table next to her and leaned down to kiss her head. "You work too much. I need to rest early today." She smiled automatically. But his affectionate gesture made her feel a weight on her chest, a weight that grew every day. In the following days, their routine continued without major changes. Elena left early to work, and Daniel stayed home since he was completing an independent project. He took advantage of the time to take care of the garden, organize accumulated papers, and make small repairs in the house. Small details that demonstrated how dedicated he was to the home they shared without embarrassment. Argo couldn't ignore the growing feeling of detachment. Every call Elena received seemed to become a secret. Every message she deleted before he could ask her anything was a reminder that something was out of place. But he forced himself not to speculate. He trusted her, or wanted to believe that he could still trust her. One Friday night, Elena casually mentioned that the company was organizing a party. Daniel offered to go with her, but she declined with a nervous smile, saying that it would just be a small celebration, that no companions were needed. He didn't insist, but something in her tone bothered him the morning of the party. Daniel got up early, determined to work in the garden. He needed something to distract him. He didn't know yet that that night would be the beginning of a series of events that would completely change the course of their lives. The day of the party arrived like any other. But there was something different in the air. Daniel felt it from the moment Elena walked out the door hurriedly, and with a smile that didn't. It seemed familiar to her. It wasn't exactly a happy smile, but a nervous one, like that of someone who tries to appear natural but hides a secret. She tried to ignore it to convince herself that it was simply the normal stress of work. However, the discomfort persisted. She spent the day restless, alternating between watching television and small repairs at home that were no longer necessary to do everything. Seemed like an excuse to fill the silence that resonated in the room. The one that had so many times been a refuge now seemed suffocating, full of questions that she did not know how to answer. She found herself checking her phone. More times than she would like to admit, waiting for a message that never came at night when Elena gave no news. A decision began to take shape in her mind, although with doubts. Elena, on the other hand, was in the center of a very different environment. The room rented for the company party was spacious, decorated with golden tones and lighting that oscillated between the elegant and the excessive. She moved around the place with the calculated confidence of someone who knows how to get noticed without attracting attention. She wore a black dress that outlined her silhouette and discreet earrings that sparkled under the lights. The music filled the space, mixed with the sound of voices, laughter, and toasts on the outside. She was the living image of composure. Inside her mind was racing the same nervousness she had felt when leaving home. Now became a tightness in her chest. She looked for someone in the crowd, but the look that found her first was not the one she expected. It was that of a coworker who approached with a glass of champagne and commented on the success of the evening. Elena responded with smiles and greetings, but her eyes continued to wander around the room. She finally saw him. He was on the other side of the room near the bar, holding a glass while talking to a small group. His presence was magnetic. Even in such a crowded environment, when their eyes met, she felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. He smiled a smile that seemed to know more than he should and began to walk towards her. "I thought you weren't going to show up," he said low enough for no one else to hear as he leaned to greet her. "I said I'd come." No, Elena replied, keeping her tone casual. But with a tremor in her voice that only he noticed, he laughed and took your hand for a moment, a brief but meaningful touch. Elena quickly pulled her hand away and looked around, making sure no one was paying attention. There was no apparent danger, but the fear of being seen already made her question her decision to be there. The clock in the lobby seemed to be ticking too slowly. Meanwhile, Daniel was already on the move. He decided to go to the party, even without being invited. It wasn't like him to act impulsively, but something compelled him. It wasn't jealousy, but a need to understand. He needed to see for himself what was going on. Even if he didn't know exactly what he was looking for, he got dressed quickly, grabbed the car keys, and drove in silence, trying to calm the thoughts that were struggling to escape control. When he reached the park in a discreet place and walked to the entrance, he was greeted with curious glances from some employees of the company. But no one questioned his presence. He recognized some faces, colleagues of Elena who had visited his house in previous dinners. He greeted politely, staying at the edge of the room where he could observe without being noticed. The room was huge, illuminated by lights that moved in sync with the music. Daniel looked around, looking for Elena. It did not take long to find her in the center of the room, with the same man he had noticed in photos of previous events. The man seemed comfortable at her side, leaning with, or if they shared a secret. Elena's laugh that he liked so much sounded different. Now it felt lighter, almost uncompromising, but with an invisible weight that Daniel felt like a punch in the stomach. He stood still, unable to look away. His hands, they closed into fists involuntarily. A wave of emotions invaded him. Anger, sadness, doubt. He didn't know which one would dominate him first. Before he could decide to approach, the lights in the room began to dim, drawing everyone's attention to the screen. Elena froze when she heard adjusting the microphone and the excited voice of the master of ceremonies, announcing a tribute. She knew there would be videos of the team, photographs of relaxed moments in the office. But something inside her screamed that this was not right. She felt her heart racing, and instinctively she looked at the man next to her, who seemed equally apprehensive. The first images were harmless smiles, hugs, team achievements. But then the screen went blank. It went dark for a moment, and what appeared next made the whole room hold its breath. He watched a shaky video. Apparently recorded amateurishly, it showed Elena at a dinner party, smiling at the man next to her. He poured her wine as their fingers touched intimately. The images continued like fragments of a story neither of them had been allowed to tell. Elena felt the world spin as her breathing grew heavier. The video ended with the two of them laughing together, and then the room went silent for a moment. No one seemed to know what to say or do. They all looked at the screen, then at Elena and the man next to her. Daniel felt as if the ground had disappeared. He looked at Elena, waiting for her to do something. Say something, but she remained still with a mix of surprise and desperation on her face. He took a step forward but stopped, unable to decide what to do. In the center of the room, Elena felt everyone's gazes burning her skin. But what terrified her the most was that Daniel's gaze was now fixed on her. He knew in that instant that nothing he said would erase what he had seen. The only thing left now was the impact of the consequences. The silence in the hallway seemed eternal. Daniel, still standing in the same place, felt the weight of betrayal pulsing in his mind and in his chest. Like a storm, every second it seemed to pass slowly, as if time was getting closer to him. The images of the video were engraved in his memory. His laughter, the touch on the arm of the other man, the complicity that should never have existed. Everything seemed unreal. But there it was. Undeniable. Elena was the first to move. She took a step towards Daniel with pleading eyes and trembling hands. But without saying a word, there was nothing she could say to erase what she had just seen. Yet, her voice finally broke the silence. "Daniel, please let me explain." He raised his hand, a gesture that instantly silenced her. His eyes, normally so serene, were now filled with something that Elena had never seen before. "Disappointment and pain." "Explain," said Daniel, his voice low but full of bitterness. "Explain that the images already explained everything." Elena looked around and realized that everyone was still watching. The gossip began to spread like wildfire. The whispers and curious glances consumed what was left of her dignity. The man at her side, who had appeared in the video, took a step back as if he wanted to disappear. But his presence only made the moment even more uncomfortable. Here, he did not beg. "Let's talk somewhere else, please." Daniel hesitated. A part of him wanted to flee from that place, leave behind the room and all the shame, but anger kept him trapped. He nodded, but not before throwing a fixed look at Elena's lover, who immediately looked away in the parking lot. Now his voice was firm, and he turned without waiting for her outside. The air was cold and penetrating, but that did nothing. To calm Daniel's fury, he stopped next to his car and crossed his arms while he expected Elena to catch up with him. She moved slowly, hesitantly, with her arms crossed, as if to protect herself from the judgment she knew was coming. When they finally reached his side, she tried to speak, but Daniel was faster. "How long?" he asked, looking directly at her. His voice was cold, almost controlled, but his eyes betrayed the whirlwind of emotions. Elena opened her mouth but couldn't make a sound. The weight of everything she was hiding seemed to crush her. When she finally managed to answer, her voice was almost a whisper. "A few months." Daniel took a step back, as if her words had hit him physically. "A few months." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "And you managed to hide it all the time. Make me believe that we were fine, that everything was normal." Elena tried to get closer. But he lifted her up again. She held her hand, stopping it from happening. Daniel, I felt lost. It's not an excuse, but it really isn't, she interrupted in a high-pitched voice. Because nothing justifies it. Nothing justifies what you did. You destroyed everything. She remained silent, tears running down her face. She wanted to say something. Anything that could ease her pain. But she knew there weren't enough words for a moment. Daniel looked at her as if he was about to explode, but then something changed. His shoulders sank, and he took a deep breath, trying to find control in the middle of the chaos, and who is he for you? He asked, his voice now, more contained but still full of pain. Elena hesitated again, but he knew he couldn't lie. It's someone from work. Just someone who was there when I was vulnerable. Daniel let out a short, humorless laugh. Vulnerable, you were vulnerable. And I know what this does to me. Knowing that while I thought I was building something for us, you were destroying everything behind my back. Elena looked down, unable to look at him, but Daniel wasn't done. And what else are you hiding? He took a step towards her, his voice getting quieter but with an intensity that made her heart race. Because I don't think that's it. Everything. Elena looked up, and in that instant he knew there was something else, something that he was afraid to say. His silence was enough to confirm it. Speak quickly. Elena. Daniel crossed his arms. Elena tried, but the words stuck in her throat. The confession she was looking for was much bigger than anything she could explain. Daniel took a step back with his gaze still fixed on her, and then in a tone that seemed more sad than angry, he said, "You have already destroyed our marriage, Elena. But it seems you are not finished destroying me." Elena remained still as Daniel walked away. His step seemed to weigh more than the last. The distance between them was not just physical. It was an abyss that seemed impossible to cross. He felt hot tears slide down his face as his mind struggled to process what had just happened. The air in the parking lot was freezing, but the cold feeling came from within an emptiness that now seemed to consume him. Everything. Daniel stood by the car with his hands firmly planted on the roof. As his labored breathing condensed in the night air, he felt like the world was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The betrayal was already an almost unbearable blow. But Elena's hesitation at his last question had planted the seed of something even worse. Doubt slowly turned to look at her again. There was no anger in his eyes, only tiredness. "You're not going to tell me, right?" His voice sounded firm but broken, like a distant echo of someone who was once whole. Elena shook her head almost imperceptibly, unable to find words. Daniel laughed a bitter and humorless laugh as he crossed his arms. "So that's it." He looked up at the sky as if searching for some divine answer. But all he found was emptiness. "You have nothing more to say." She tried to get closer, but he stepped back and raised a hand to stop her. "No. Don't do it. Don't pretend you care now. You had chances. Elena, you had every chance to tell me the truth. But you chose. You chose this." He made a vague gesture indicating everything around him, the scandal, the shame, the chaos. She took a step back as if his words had physical weight. There was no way to defend herself. He was right. She chose that. Even without fully understanding why, the next few minutes passed in silence. Elena, still standing, saw Daniel open the car door. But he didn't get in right away. He stood there looking at her over his shoulder, as if he expected something, anything, to convince him to stay. But she remained motionless, prisoner of her own guilt and paralyzed by uncertainty. Dan got in the car and closed the door. The sound echoed in the empty parking lot. The engine roared as he accelerated, leaving the place without looking back. Elena stood there alone. The cold finally reached her skin and left her shivering. The sound of the tires was lost in the distance, and she felt the crushing weight of loneliness. Daniel drove aimlessly with his hands clenched on the wheel as thoughts swept through his mind like waves in a storm. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to erase every memory, every moment he had shared with her. But at the same time, a part of him still sought to understand. He still longed for answers. How could someone he knew so intimately hide so much from her? Anger gave way to sadness. A sharp pain that seemed to pierce his chest with every mile. He finally stopped at a deserted gas station and rested his head on the wheel for a moment. Silence was his only company until a memory hit him. He remembered the morning of his birthday. Those back when Elena had made him a special breakfast, the way she smiled as she placed the cup of coffee in front of him, as if it were any other day. Now he saw it differently. He wondered if his lover was already part of their lives at that moment. Every shared memory seemed now tainted by doubts he could never answer. He looked at the phone on the passenger seat. A part of him wanted to call someone, vent, find support. But who? Friends, family? He didn't want to drag anyone into his whirlwind, so he stayed there staring at the blank screen until a new message came breaking the silence. It was from Elena, just 3 words: "Please come back." Meanwhile, Elena remained in the parking lot, sitting on the curb with her arms around her knees. She felt small, insignificant, as if she were just another figure in the crowd waiting for the inevitable trial. The message she had sent to Daniel was her last attempt to save something that seemed lost. He knew it wasn't just about betrayal. It was deeper than that. It was years of dissatisfaction. Sosa, of unspoken words of desires buried beneath the facade of a perfect marriage she loved. Daniel, this she knew for sure. But her love seemed insufficient given the decisions she had made. The sound of footsteps brought her out of her thoughts. She raised her head and saw someone approaching. It was the man who was next to her at the party. He seemed nervous, as if he also carried on his shoulders the weight of the night. "Elena, we need to talk." His voice was urgent but low, as if he feared being heard. He stood up slowly, crossing his arms. "Not now, I can't," she began. But he interrupted her. "It's not about us, it's about him." He gestured towards the direction where Daniel had disappeared. "He needs to know the truth." Elena's eyes opened and a shiver ran down her spine. Not his voice was firmer than she expected. "That's none of your business." He didn't take a step closer, with his eyes fixed on hers. "Do you think you can hide this forever? Do you think that he won't find out? You need to tell Elena." Looked away, unable to look at him. The truth he mentioned was like a weight threatening to crush her. And she knew that regardless of her choices, the revelation would come. It was only a matter of time. Hours later, Daniel finally came home. The door was open and the lights in the room were still on. He entered slowly, as if the house had become strange territory. Elena waited on the couch with red eyes and a tired face. She stopped in the middle of the room, crossing her arms. "I read your message and came back." Her voice was firm, but without the anger of before. "Now, you are going to tell me what you are hiding." Elena took a deep breath and gathered the courage she needed to speak, but the words did not come. And in that suffocating silence, they both realized that the final confrontation was yet to come. The silence reigned heavily in the room. Daniel remained still with his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on Elena, who was still sitting on the couch. The tension was palpable, as if the air around them was about to split. He knew there was no way out now. The truth he had avoided for so long was about to come to light, and with it all that was left of what was once his marriage. "I'm waiting," said Daniel, his voice cutting through the silence like a sword. Elena looked at him with eyes full of tears and tiredness. There were no more excuses, no more defenses. With a tremor in her voice, it began. "It wasn't just the betrayal, Daniel. I know this is more than she can bear." But she swallowed hard, fighting the urge to look away. "The man you saw in the video, he's not just a lover, he's her." She hesitated, and Daniel took a step forward, his expression hardened. He spoke quickly. "Elena, don't torture me more than you already have." He took a deep breath before letting out the words. "It's someone I met before we were married. Someone I loved before you." The revelation hung in the air, but Daniel didn't seem moved. He simply waited, knowing that it wasn't. "That was all when we started going out. I was already Ada of him." The words came out quickly, as if they were less painful if they were said all at once. "And I never told you. I let you believe that I was the father." Daniel's world seemed to stop. He stood still, as if the impact of those words had frozen everything around him. The revelation was so unexpected, so devastating, that he didn't know how to react. What did he finally manage to say with a lower voice than he expected? Are you telling me that our son? He stopped correcting himself? My son was never mine. Elena shook her head, and tears ran freely down her face. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I fell in love with you, Daniel. You were everything to me and I. Her voice trailed off and she couldn't finish the sentence. Daniel took 2 steps back, as if he needed to distance himself from her to absorb the blow. Everything he believed to be true. All the memories they shared now seemed like a lie, cruel, and he knows it. Daniel asked, referring to the man he had seen next to her in the video. Elena nodded, unable to speak. How much time has passed? Daniel insisted, his voice growing firmer. A few months ago, he showed up at work, and that was when it all started. Daniel felt a wave of anger emerge again, but this time mixed with something deeper, an overwhelming sadness. He didn't know how to face the fact that his whole life had been based on a lie. He didn't know if he hated Elena, or if he simply regretted what they had lost. Hours later, Daniel left the house, drove through empty streets, still trying to process everything. In a moment of impulse, he stopped in front of his older sister's house. She had always been the voice of reason in his life, and he needed someone to listen to him. When he opened the door, all he needed was a look to let him know that something terrible had happened. While Daniel was venting, his sister listened in silence with her eyes full of tears. From the pain he clearly felt when he finished, she took his hands and said, "Daniel, whatever you do from now on will define who you are, not for her, nor for him, but for you. You can choose to carry this pain and let it destroy you, or you can choose to leave it behind and find something that truly makes you happy." Those words stayed with him as he walked home, where Elena was still waiting. But something inside him had already changed. In the following days, the separation became inevitable. Daniel asked Elena to leave the house, and she obeyed without protest. He also insisted that she reveal the truth to her son, who was already an adult. It was the least she could do to repair the damage she had caused. For Elena, the shame and guilt were a constant weight. She walked away from everything, including the man she had cheated on, Daniel. With their relationship no longer had purpose. He was just a painful reminder of your bad decisions. Daniel in turn decided to remake his life. He left the job that connected him with the past and moved to a new city. There he found a small support group for people who had experienced devastating betrayals and lies. For the first time, he allowed himself to share his pain without fear of being judged, and little by little he began to find a new purpose. Elena's son, now aware of the whole truth, faced his own internal battle. The revelation deeply shook his relationship with her, but also well understood that Daniel would always be his father, no matter what the blood said. In the end, each character faced the consequences of their choices. Daniel, although marked by pain, found a path to healing. Elena was left alone, regretting her actions, and her son, divided between 2 worlds, decided to build her own life, based on the honesty that was lacking in the past. The story did not end with a total redemption, but with a powerful reminder: the decisions we make, especially those based on lies, have the power to destroy everything that surrounds you. Like the story, leave your comment and tell us what you thought of this result. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. And remember, this channel does not admit under any circumstances any type of betrayal here. We show how wrong decisions can devastate lives. Until the next.